Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Destiny video. This one is primarily going to be a review for the new Destiny comic, Warmind issue 1. But they've done things a little bit differently with regards to the kind of, I suppose, lead in to the new expansion. And have actually given us some, I suppose, story details, a preview of the story. Basically it's Grimoire Cards, just in a slightly different form. And I'm going to cover kind of all of it together to give kind of context to what's going on here, because while I think most people would be familiar with some of the stuff mentioned here, like Hive Gods, Rasputin, the kind of Bray family, Clovis Bray, some of this stuff is kind of more new and so kind of needs the context of some of this stuff. So I'll start off with the narrative preview and then we will eventually get to discussing the comic, which is available on Bungie.net. Links in the description to both of these articles, where you can read the comic on the Bungie website as well as this narrative preview article. So we'll start with this. The first section is just kind of the game director talking about it. This was where we knew that the comic will be coming out in a couple of days. But the first one is about Tyra Karn, who obviously we know is a cryptarch. It's her talking to her ghost, I think it is, or a ghost. This one, I don't think there's too much to it. I'm not going to really read through the full thing. But basically the idea here is that it's kind of further investigation into Clovis Bray. That they obviously, what we know of Clovis Bray is that it's like this kind of like big company like that really moved things forward in the golden age. They're responsible for so much technology. If we remember the kind of Siva expansion from Destiny 1, that was all related to kind of technology stuff that Clovis Bray did, and there's more investigation going into some of what they had going on Mars, and we'll get into that more. The main takeaways are just that there's more than meets the eye basically going on Mars when it came to Clovis Bray and some of their research facilities. The core thing here is that they start to mention Warmind development, that the Clovis Bray was behind the Warmind development, and Rasputin of course is the Warmind that we know of. They also here more or less clarify something that was sort of confusing, and that is like, are there still other active Warminds, or is Rasputin the only one? And like we'd mentioned of Charlemagne here, and they kind of confirm here that Charlemagne is actually a sub-mind of Rasputin. I think that's the interpretation, meaning that Charlemagne, I suppose, isn't as important as we maybe initially thought before. But they add some, Rahul still disagrees, but there's some confusion. But they more or less say that he's more focused on engrams rather than really investigating this sort of stuff. So that one's not as important, but it's just meant to give you an idea of like sort of everyone's focusing their attention on the Clovis Bray facilities. This one's very interesting in that this is ultimately, I suppose, what is going to be revealed to be behind a lot of what's going on right now on Mars, and in regards to like the enemies that we're going to be fighting. But this card, or web lore as they're calling it, is called Apocrypha. It's about the Hive again. And yeah, so we basically run down the 5 worm gods of Fundament, which is obviously the kind of initial planet that like Oryx and his sisters came from when they were known by different names. They kind of quickly run through his story. They call him Oryx here, but interpret this name as being Oryx. He kind of renames himself later on. And they basically just say that he became powerful enough. He killed one of the gods, Akka, and then kind of Yul kind of took over a little bit of the remaining 4 gods. Where is the next important bit? Yeah, here. Zal had a pact with a forgotten child abandoned by its father. So this, like, again, it's open to interpretation, but I think the most obvious interpretation is that means that Oryx had another child, or potentially one of Oryx's sisters has a notable kind of character who is this forgotten child, or even there's that other character whose name I'm forgetting that was sort of like their enemy during their story, but I can't remember her name, but it could be her child. But Oryx, I think, is where they're leaning, given that they really heavily lean into the Oryx stuff. So one of the worm gods, Zol, who did I say about him? Zol, Will of the Thousands, is that. Yul is the honest worm. And they basically seem to imply here, again, open to interpretation, but the 5 gods became 3. The cursed one took a fraction of Zol's power, and in return, Zol took the heart from the child whose name had been struck from the world's grave. The orphan called life out of death and fed that power to Zol. So the idea here is not that I don't think they killed any specific worm god here, but they're saying that Zol kind of combined his powers with this kind of forgotten child, who I think most people are speculating is Nokris, based on us more or less knowing that that is a character who is of note, but they haven't really touched on too much. And him, going all in with Zol is meant to basically be Zol removing himself from, I suppose, the pantheon of worm gods. And says here, I, the child, become herald death, record these words, they are not of the sorrow, they are mine. That's just setting up who I think that Nokris combined with Zol will be our main kind of enemy in this thing here. So what that means is that we will probably get an insight into what a worm god, I suppose, properly looks like, but it will be, I suppose, altered by the fact that he will be combined with Nokris, probably. The next card, Cryptarch, this is a more interesting one, I think, because I said Master Reinhardt, Cryptarch, and it's this kind of paper he seems to have authored called Collapse and Post-Collapse Incidents on Mars, an examination of the ecological changes in the polar regions. And this is basically saying that in the polar ice caps of Mars, basically stuff is happening here. They're kind of confirming that like the Hive have a kind of they have a relationship with this section of Mars, and they're kind of confirming that there's a lot of ice surrounding the kind of Hellas Basin region, and that the temperature is 20 degrees. But what caused such a drastic change in the climate? In that it used to not be like this, but now all of a sudden it's this kind of crazy icy kind of area, and it's not just caused by the fact that the Traveler was inactive for so long, and it doesn't seem to just be like completely natural, like ice taking over. Something happened here to cause this, and they're not exactly sure why. And again, they start to mention like Warminds and Warsats again, this is obviously a kind of report from Anna Bray, and it's kind of what they know of what's going on here so far, and setting up, I suppose, what we're about to read in the comic, but the idea that they're going to want to investigate the icy regions to find out what caused this, but also because Anna Bray is a Bray, and it's a Clovis Bray facility that they're looking for, and she's trying to kind of get her memories of who she was before she became a Guardian back, but we'll touch on that. And then we get this mention of Cameron, who seems to be another Cryptarch, who is part of Owl Sector, and she's kind of supporting Anna along the way, but there's also a sense of like she seems very invested herself, not just for Anna, in what's going on. Next up is this Zavala card, which basically is like he's holding this secret. He knows what's in the ice, and but that is Rasputin. Basically, is kind of the core of who Rasputin is, where he came from, and so on, is under this ice, and he doesn't want anyone to know about it. He talks about how, like, I think Saladin knows as well, and they're doing everything they can to stop this, and that this is a huge danger that's going on here. He kind of mentions Siva, that it's obviously related to Clovis Bray through that, confirming that like Rasputin is broken. That I think from previous Grimoire cards we had an idea that Zavala wanted to kind of get Rasputin on the side of the Guardians, but I suppose at this point he's more or less given up on this, and the implication seems to be that it'll be Rasputin like infected or like changed by the Hive or something like that. But that'd be cool if this story in the game actually like touches on Zavala and this kind of information coming out. That could be very interesting about how the reveal comes out. Plus potentially there's something we'll talk about in the comic, I suppose, that may be Zavala focused. I think this is the last one. It's a Rasputin card himself, so obviously this is in kind of techno jargon and it's kind of hard to translate, but the basic idea here is Polaris, I think, is just a region on Mars that they're talking about. And what's going on here, he just says like internal alert, multiple report, and here like it's basically interpreting some of these things. Sterile neutrino patterning refers to the Taken as far as we're aware, but I suppose it could be Hive as well, since the Hive are related to the Taken. But we've specifically had dialogue that mentions that sterile neutrino patterning usually means that the Taken are coming or in the area. Average Polaris temperature is important because we've got mentioned the average temperature of the ice, and that fact that like it's melting, because the card with Anna above mentioned that like it's now 20 degrees, so the ice is starting to melt. Whereas before before something happened, which is the Traveler's Light bursting out at the end of the original Destiny 2 story, it was just complete regions of ice. Then we get reactivated Ario seismic analysis detects high quantities of non-native organic chitin. This word here, Ario seismic, I believe is meant to just refer to the fact that like Ario is like a term you use to refer to Mars. So it's like Mars seismic analysis detects high qualities of non-native organic chitin. This, I think, is meant to refer to the Hive, and that chitin is kind of related to like the exoskeletons of like bugs and stuff like that. So the most bug-like species, of course, is the Hive, and combined with other stuff, this is what makes the most sense. That we got mention of like parasites, and here he hypothesizes that one event mechanism, and he flags the term acausal, which means basically that it's something that like can't be explained, which in Destiny ends up being a fairly common term that refers to the fact that science can't really explain how exactly the light works or darkness works. So it's usually referred to like guardians or Hive, or a species that uses the darkness. So the Hive uses the darkness, so their powers are acausal in that it's basically magic, in the same way that Guardians' abilities are effectively magic as well. And then he says the possibility of a hard civilization kill event is non-zero, so that there is at least some percentage chance that if the ice fully melts and something happens, it could kill the population of Mars, or potentially the whole solar system or something like that. He confirms finally at the end that the temperature is greater than the melting point, and he is going to use these resources specifically here. Charlemagne obviously is a submind. Voluspa, I think, is mentioned in one of the previous Destiny expansions that relate to the Warmind. I'm not exactly sure what it does. And he says he's assuming control of atmospheric defenses, warsats. So he's basically going to drop some warsats, and invoking Aurora Palisade, which is some sort of a protocol that's going to help solve what's happening here, which could be like calling in the Hive to like defend him or something like that. We're not fully sure, but there's a lot going on here, like Zavala knowing the secret, Anna Bray being like the main new character that we're focusing on here, one of the Hive gods, Zol, kind of getting a focus here, getting more into like Oryx's family stuff, with potentially his kind of like forgotten son, or a character who's somehow related to Oryx. It seems like the Cryptarchs are sort of heavily involved here. We're getting Hive stuff, Warmind stuff. I'm liking the direction that we're going in here. So let's get into the comic here. So there is the cover. Then we get this kind of a preview page, which I have open here in full screen. Again, it's sort of Rasputin stuff, so it's kind of hard to fully interpret what's going on here. But the idea here is this investigator, I think we're meant to interpret as being Anna Bray. And he kind of confirms here that he had to change, and this is, I think, what's going to be the core of the story here, of like, he went from being this kind of protector of humanity, they called him a tyrant, and that they named him Rasputin, and it wasn't enough to save them, so he changed because he couldn't save everyone with the attack of the darkness, which is like one of the biggest kind of lore events. And then they confirm here, the investigator long dead, alive again, her body grafted to power she and I do not understand. So that's confirming the, I suppose, resurrection of Anna Bray. And the gardener, I think that's how like certain things refer to the traveler. And she's searching for Rasputin, of course. That's ultimately, she knows that Rasputin is a thing that she sort of knows about but doesn't remember everything. And they confirm it here. If she remembers me, she will not recognize me. Her moral formatting is inadequate to comprehend what I've become. So they confirm here that basically Anna Bray, before she like was killed for the first time, knew Rasputin. She was part of, obviously she's part of the family, the Bray family, so of course she probably was involved in most of these kind of big projects, especially the Warmind here. So she knew about Rasputin and who he is, what he is, all of the key information about him from her first life. And we always know that when a Guardian is turned into a Guardian, they sort of forget who their first life was, except in a couple of cases. I think Shinobu is an example of a Guardian who, because of how she was resurrected and found by her ghost, was around people who knew who she was, and they kind of saw her be resurrected and kind of obviously thought her who she was. Similarly here, like Anna of course has the name badge that we saw in the trailer on her person when she's resurrected, so she knows who she is, and that's the core of the story here. So let's get into this. Overall, I'd say this comic, I think, it's pretty interesting. It sets up a lot of stuff. It kind of touches on a lot of the points mentioned in the narrative preview, and is, I suppose, more directly acting as setup for the story that we're going to get on May 8th in the actual expansion. But we're out here, Mars Arcadia Circle, and we've got the crazy kind of ice stuff going on in here. 20 meters thick, 15 million kilometers. It's a huge area of ice. This is like not particularly normal. And they're narrowing it down to about 200 square kilometers. And we get here, this is Cameron talking to Anna here, and this is obviously the confirming here that you had the ID badge when you were first revived, and it names a research facility that no one even knew existed, the Clovis Bray's Cradle of Invention, and confirming that she worked there. This is obviously where they did most of their really, really high-end research, and they're both kind of working to find out about this stuff. And we get that there's sort of a relationship between Cameron and Anna. We don't know exactly, because Cameron's a completely new character we know nothing about, I think, outside of the little article thing I read before. So they're friends, obviously, and she wants Anna to be safe, even if she is technically immortal. We see here that Jinju is the name of Anna's ghost, and they're just kind of going in whatever direction that they want. She's kind of scanning that there's like stuff under the ice, in the ice over there, which is interesting that, like, obviously it's suggesting like Anna has some sort of like implants in her eyes that allows her to do these scans, I think. It's not really touched on all that much. Area of Mars was terraformed by the Traveler during the Golden Age, and basically saying an ice cap of this size doesn't just appear not naturally. Something happened. That's the big mystery going on here. That this ice that suddenly like came out of nowhere and engulfed a huge portion of the planet is now starting to melt because the Traveler is back. But what caused the ice in the first place, when in the past, in the Golden Age, it was this amazing facility with the most high-end technology. But what do we have here? Connection to Clovis Bray. Rasputin, of course, comes into play here. This is interesting in that covered in ice, suggesting that there was some sort of a like flash freeze moment almost. The fact that like there's ships that are just frozen in ice. It looks like these kind of robots, which I think are meant to be frames like from the tower, which I think, given that the ship looks also like kind of like a Guardian ship in a way, is this like Zavala and like one of his attempts to either get Rasputin on his side, but then realizing that something was happening and like an escape happened, or is this like the aftermath of like the initial situation that caused the ice, and that these were the people who caused it and they ended up getting frozen along the way. And there's no record of any like major battle having taken place here. again, like the records are kept secret, which is what we know from Zavala, so they may not know, or either it's true and there was never a battle here, and this is just, as Anna says here, they were just transports, and these are just evacuation vehicles. There we get the Clovis Bray symbol, and they're kind of on the right track. But then she is attacked by Red Legion Cabal, giving us a timeline from where this is happening, as we'll see in a minute here. So they attack, they mention Gaul, she takes out some of these guys. Going through this quickly because it's an action scene. She uses Golden Gun, confirming she's a hunter and a gunslinger specifically. She uses the Golden Gun to completely destroy this kind of Red Legion commander guy and the other people behind him. Then she's attacked by the kind of Cabal war dog thing, but then her light suddenly kind of disappears anymore, and her ghost kind of drops to the ground. You can see it kind of pings off the ground and says that it can't be felt anymore. This is happening at the same time as Gaul is attacking the tower, and the Traveler is kind of, the light is blocked off with the Gaul's machine. So this is happening during the kind of, I suppose, lead into Destiny 2. That's the timing on this. So Anna's actually investigating the ice around the area at a time when the temperatures aren't melting yet, I think is the interpretation here. And she's about to get killed, obviously, because she's now mortal without the light, but she manages to kill this dog, and then we know from the game that even though she's not immortal anymore, she can't be revived, that ghosts can still heal their guardian at the very least. And now it's very, very dangerous. She's in this hostile area, and now she's mortal effectively, but she still wants to go ahead and investigate this because this is what they're there for. And yes, and then Cameron kind of gives a little bit of an inspiring speech that it's not just because you're a guardian you have a ghost, and it's because you're brave, but because you're the single bravest person I know, and you have a destiny to fulfill, to dig into this history. And she just says that she can't find Clovis Bray and Rasputin. And this is when the war sats, I suppose, are beginning to drop, which I think is from this page here. I think it's like this, and then it relates to Rasputin's thing from down here on the narrative preview of him. I'm not sure about the timing on this because war sats are beginning to drop here, but like I assume the temperature change is caused by that. But anyway. This at least seems to be like one warsat, and she has to cross a sort of region. This is where she gets the call from Zavala about the city falling, but they sort of suggest that like a decent amount of time has passed. I think that's what meant to be the interpretation, that she's now spent a lot of time just on her own without her light, and that she's getting this message a bit late, which means that I suppose the entire Red War has probably happened for most of this time. Because I think based on the cliffhanger, we sort of know when issue 2 is going to pick up. But they have to keep going. Warsat drops right where she is, basically. And she has to get out of the way. And she's about to be dragged underwater by her cloak. And she's inspired by Cameron's words here. Takes the cloak off and tries to swim back up to the surface. But it looks like she's about to drown. Now, I assume what's going to happen here is that the whole Destiny 2 initial campaign has probably happened at this point, and the light will come back, and she'll probably use that to get out of this mess, because we know obviously she's in the expansion, like our characters are going to meet her, so that's pretty interesting. As for other lore that we know about Anna Bray, I don't think she appears in like the Grimoire all that much, or like we know too much about her beyond that she was a guardian. I think we've known that before this. The name and the connection to Clovis Bray, but I don't think they'd ever really addressed it too much. And that she fought during the Battle of Twilight Gap, and is like implied to have like died during that battle, or suggesting that there's some sort of a mystery in that she doesn't want to contact Zavala at the end of this comic and be involved in like the overall battle, so she's sort of isolated herself from everyone else to accomplish her own goals. I think clearly suggesting that she had a disagreement at some point with Zavala about like if she could or could not investigate the Brave facilities. And I think that could be an interesting one if we get interactions in the DLC between Zavala and Anna. But either way, that's the, I suppose, preview for all of the Warmind stuff. I think it looks quite good. I appreciate the way Destiny did this. Bungie, I mean, did this, releasing the comic before the DLC drops, and putting out all those kind of Grimoire cards effectively to give us a bit of context, in that they haven't really ever done that before. It's always tended to be the kind of lore community who'd like data mine the Grimoire cards to give us some context, but now it feels like they've actually presented it in a very kind of open way where like everyone now has a sense of like what's going on here, and maybe the people who are really into the lore know that a little bit more. But yeah, I'm excited. I'll be playing obviously the Warmind DLC next week, and who knows, I may do a video covering my thoughts on the story if it is actually improved and like it actually comes across as more of a story. But yeah, that's the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.